Um, all right, I think we'll go on and we'll finish up with the second part of this that I'll probably go through fairly quickly. Whoops. So this part of what we're going to do is we're going to talk about one of the ways that you start to make decisions of what should I plant. And most of what I'm going to say is based on nature. So you have to ask yourself questions. And the questions you have are, am I trying to make the landscape conform to what I want? I want a lilac. I don't care that it doesn't grow here. I want a lilac because I grew up with a lilac. Or are you trying to make your landscape conform to nature? If you're a landscape architect and you design buildings, a landscape designer and you design landscapes, there's a kind of a paradigm question that you would ask yourself. I've been hired to design a building. Am I matching the building to the landscape? And am I trying to make the building work with the landscape? Or am I trying to force the landscape to work with the building? Most of what we do is we cut everything down and then we put in a landscape around the building because I want it to be pretty, I want it to conform to the building. Well, how about you think about designing with, I have a home and I want my home to match nature around it. Which is going to be more successful? Having a landscape that conforms to nature or having a landscape that conforms to your building? That's a question that you have to ask yourself. And I'm not going to say there's a right or wrong about it. I'm just going to say you have to ask yourself, do I want a lilac? And lilacs don't grow in my area. Yes, I want a lilac, so I'm going to make it happen. You can do that, but it may not conform to nature and it may be very difficult to have that lilac survive. If you're living in Florida and you want your lilac, well, good luck with that. But you could probably make it work if you're good enough, okay? So where we try to make things work in landscapes is, I want my desires met because I want what I want. I would recommend that you ought to support the environment around you and integrate the landscape and the plants together. Okay. All right, so let's talk about plant communities. I don't know that a lot of people know this, but plants tend to grow in communities. So our community in the Cobblescale area is maples, beeches, birches, viburnums, apple trees, spireas. Those are living communities that work together. And if I have a maple birch community, let me just stop. Okay. Where I have a Maple Beach birch community, I know based on the plants what kind of climate I will have and what kind of soils I will have. Plant communities live together in the same environment. So what do I have for maples, beeches, and birches? I have climates that match maples, beech, and birches, and I have soils that match maples, beeches, and birches. So the things that we're looking for in climate, when I'm trying to evaluate an area, what's the high and what's the low in the area? An average winter temperature, I don't care average winter temperature. What's the coldest it's going to get? Because the coldest it's going to get is determined whether my flower buds and my leaves and my plant are okay. If it goes to 30 below zero, well, sugar maple doesn't care. Sugar maple will handle 30. It'll actually handle 45 below zero. But you take an oak tree, and an oak tree may not handle that. Wind. When you analyze your location, do you know that within our region here in upstate New York, wind out of the northwest kills plants? The northwest wind is cold, dry air. The wind from the east comes from the Atlantic Ocean. It's moist and it's usually moderate. So if you have plants that on your property that are exposed to northwest wind, you're probably going to have plants that have to be really tough or they're not going to survive. The southwest sun is the hot spot. So where's the best place to put tender plants in upstate New York? East side. Not exposed to the northwest wind, not exposed to the sun. East is where things like it the most. Why do plants survive in Buffalo and Syracuse better than they survive in Cobleskill? Buffalo and Cobleskill have more snow cover. So all of those will determine what plants are native to an area. Then we have to talk about soils, and what really determines what plants will grow in your region is the soil. So we may extend this presentation into a further presentation talking just about soils. Those of you that want to garden, you want to grow things in your garden, the top number one thing that determines whether you can grow something on your property is the soil. Roots are the most important part of the plant. You might like the top of the plant, but the root will determine where it grows. So we have to understand soils, soil depth, soil water drainage. All right, just very quickly here, plant community evaluations. We need to collect information. So one of the things that you want to do to determine, can I grow this plant on my property, is inventory your plants. Take a ride through your neighborhood and make a list of what you see. And what you see in your neighborhood will probably work on your property, unless your property is very unique and different. But inventory the plants in your neighborhood, and that would be native and non-native plants. The native plants will tell you what the plant community is. Maple beech birch, or oak hemlock, or pine, rhododendron. The native plants will tell you what is native to the region, but literally drive through the neighborhood and make a listing of what you see, and that will work on your property. From that, you identify your climate on your property, you identify your soils. And I'd highly recommend not buying this book unless you have some extra money to spend. This is an old book by Gary Heitschuh, Native Trees and Shrubs and Vines for Urban and Rural America. The really good thing about Heitschuh's book is it functions as a plant identification book, but for every plant, he lists at the bottom of the page the plants that will grow with that plant. So if I have an elderberry, it will give me the list of plants that will exist with elderberry. It gives me the range for the plant community and gives me usually soils and climate. It's a really good book, a really expensive older book that's not commonly known. So you may use it. I always just use it as a reference from the library. I got it from the library, or I got it sent to me through a library loan program. And I took the information that I needed out of it, because once I have the community, I have it. I don't need more information. If I move to Denver, I pull out Gary Heitschuh's book, I'll look up the plants of the region. Good enough, I have my list. So create your list. Here's the plants in our communities. In the United States, we have two basic communities in northern United States. We have cold northern zones, where we are here in the Cobleskill region, that have basic soils, which means the pH is a little higher. It's a little sweeter soils. And the soils are dense. We have usually what are known as clay loams, silty loams, a little lower organic matter, and those tend to be beeches, sugar maples, viburnums, apples, red twig dogwoods, lilacs, those types of things. That's our community. But the other plants that you can find in our range, we find oaks in our range, but the oaks are going to be in bright, sunny, warmer, southern exposures. Beech are going to be pretty much everywhere. If you have oaks, you have sun, and you have a little warmer. So if you have an oak, pine, flowering dogwood, rhododendron group, you have acid soils. You have well-drained soils that have moisture, and you have more organic matter in the soil. Two very basic different. So if you do your plant inventory and you've got oak, pine, dogwood, rhododendron, you have acid soils and you can grow blueberries. Try to grow blueberries in Cobleskill. Well, forget it. You're going to have to plant them in a peat moss bale because our soils are just not good enough. But you know what? We have native blueberries. So what might work in Cobleskill? What might work in Cobleskill, what might work in Cooperstown and Esperance might be a native blueberry because it's evolved and developed in this region in heavier soils. Or you go into a bog that's got actually a lot of acid soil because there was a lot of hemlock and a lot of evergreens there. Do your plant inventory and then do the evaluation of the climate. I threw these pictures in. I'll give you a little second to tell me what you see and what this, what's on my left screen. Anybody know? So we'll tell you what that is. That's turkeys that have been in the woods. You go into the woods and I find turkeys scratching around. What are they looking for? Turkeys generally, when they're doing that, are looking for acorns. I know I have an oak forest. And since I have an oak forest, what do I know about that spot? The soils are acid. The trees are probably on the south side because they're getting sun, where they're somewhat exposed and getting sun. And there's probably hemlocks in the area because oak and hemlock tend to work together. That's once you start to study the environment and communities, you start to take in, oh, the animals live with certain plants around them, and the soils live with the plants in a different way. On the left side are lichens, and lichens are a combination of a algae and a fungus. What I find with lichens on rocks and trees is lichens work in a symbiotic relationship with plants, but where you have a lot of lichens, you have extremes. You have either extreme heat, extreme dry, or extreme cold. And the plants tend to be suffering in a lot of cases, not because the lichen is there, but because the environment is so extreme. If you walk around Landis Arboretum and you go up into the evergreen area, parking lot, you walk up the hill, the evergreen area, there's some trees that are loaded with lichens. The lichens aren't so much killing the tree, they're just symbiotic. The tree's in a bad spot because that spot has very high rock underlayment. So in the spring, it's very wet, and in the summer, it's very dry. And in the winter, it's very cold. Lichens love that spot because lichens move in where other plants, other things don't like it. They're just an indicator of extremes. So here's, there's a swamp down behind my home. Some of the things that you look for, that you start to study, will it work on my property? This is down right along the edge of the swamp. And what do we have along the edge of the swamp? We have aggressive plants. We have invasive species, full sun. The place that plants will be the thickest are right on the edge of the woods where they're getting sun. They got a little protection. So this is a protected sunny spot. And we have a lot of invasives there. We have autumn olive. We have just things that are very aggressive. Those are the places that you'll find invasives move in first. But what I know about those is they'll work, okay? They're temporary. And temporary, by what I temporary mean is you have a spot and landscapes evolve and change. If you think you're going to plant a landscape and have it stay the same forever and ever and ever, you don't understand ecosystems, because ecosystems change. The soil changes, it gets more organic matter in it. It gets cooler because the plant's growing, and the plant actually develops an environment that it doesn't live in permanently. Here's a hemlock forest. What do we know about hemlock? Hemlocks like extremes. They like cold. So where I have hemlocks, I have a cold spot and I have acid soils. Here's a birch location. Birch, if you have birch on your property, the common question I get is, why are my birch trees dying? Birch trees are an early succession forest plant. So birch trees will be the first to come in open land. And then as sugar maples and ashes and pines move in, the birches die out. They're not a permanent plant. They're early succession. So if you're going to plan your landscape, plan for change. I want birch trees. Okay, you'll have birch trees for 15 years. You better plan for them declining and dying. But when I have birch, I know I have open land. I have colder spots, probably. I have heavier soils. But birch, there's two birches, paper birch and gray birch. Paper birch grows in heavy soils. Gray birch grows in sandy soils. Cobleskill has a lot of paper birch because we have heavier, sweet soils. If you go to Schenectady and Rotterdam, or the edge of the pine bush, they have gray birch. Sandy soils, organic matter, more acid in those spots. Pick it for the environment. Here's the swamp down behind my house, and this is a pretty good example of plant communities. On the right side are oak trees. And what did I say about oaks? They want sun. So this is over here is south, and it's picking up all the sun from the south. On this side are birch and pine will take colder spots. So that's facing north. Red twig dogwood, common to landscapes around here. Middle of the swamp. Likes heavy soils, likes water. Now we start to look at some of our landscape plants. Dogwoods, Kousa dogwood and flowering dogwood. Both of those are edge of the woods or partially in the woods. Shadblow serviceberry. Shadblow serviceberry, this picture's from Maine, coast of Maine. This picture's from Rockland County, New York. Very broad range for Shadblow serviceberry, understory tree, and it actually can grow in sun and shade. If you find that plant, identify it. If it's in your neighborhood, you can use it. Now, could you use a Shadblow serviceberry that's native to Japan? If you went to Japan and you looked at climate and soils, and they had a serviceberry that was not the American serviceberry, it would probably work in your area if it matches the soils and the climate. So whether you're a natives only person or you're an introduced plant, will the introduced plant work on your property? If the climate and soils match, it should work. Or you're going to have to create the climate and soil to make it work. Here's a plant community on a rock outcrop in Maine. All of those little plants grow together. And if you take out some of those plants, the ecosystem does not function as well because they rely on each other. Nature works together as a group. You can't take and just plant one plant. I want all red maples. Well, it's going to create a problem. Look to nature. Down the bottom of this picture is the mall area in Washington, D.C., and we see that there are a lot of Japanese cherry trees there. Japanese cherry trees are early succession plants. They're pioneer plants. They don't live long. Do you know that they plant cherry trees every single year? If you want a challenge as a horticulturalist get the job as the horticulturalist in Washington, D.C. You're going to have people walking on your roots every single day, and the soils there are compacted as tight as concrete. So how do those trees grow there? The Park Service actually uses what's called engineered soil, that when you walk on it, it doesn't compact. Why do we keep planting cherry trees? Because they're a national treasure. They're a donation from the Japanese government back in the 1920s. So we keep doing it even though it's not the best place for the plant. So should I do native? Shouldn't I do native? You decide, can I get away with it? Can I make it work or not? Put this in here, see if you could. Here's the red twig dogwood, but can you find the goose on her nest? She's right there. That goose sat on that nest for about 4 weeks before little babies hatched out. So going down and enjoying nature is fun. And here is a garden of all non-native plants. The people that own this property, both were in their 90s, the last I knew of them. The husband had traveled through China before they closed the borders in China, and was a plant collector, a plant hunter. He and his wife both knew every scientific name and common name of every single plant on their property in their 90s. And they enjoyed every single bit of their property. And this little spot, there's no maintenance, because they selected plants that grew in plant communities. Simple, just match nature to your landscape and your soils and your climate. That's a protected spot on their property. If they put it anywhere else, it probably wouldn't work. And the last slide I have, I don't know if you know where that is. That's Skellig Michael Island out off the coast of Ireland. My wife and I went there a few years back, and the next time we saw a Star Wars movie, we realized we were in the environment that they filmed 2 of the Star Wars movies. So that is what I have for you. So I hope you enjoyed.
Chris, thank you so much. This has been terrific, and we really appreciate you coming on board with us at Landis. And we are looking forward to the next 2 that Chris and I will talk for and get out so that everybody knows about them.
And I sent Wilma the PowerPoint PDF already.
Yep.
So you should have that to review. And if you have questions, I can stay on for a little while.
Okay.
Thanks for your interest. It's been fun.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Chris, are there nurseries in the area that cater to the native plants in Cobleskill? Do you have any nursery? Where I am in, outside of Rochester, I actually have a friend who owns a native plant nursery down in Springwater. And
I would say I don't, other than the smaller nurseries in the area, I don't know. And do you know of any native plant nurseries in the area?
No, the one we used to get to supply the Arboretum went out of business. And we can't find a source of just native plants. But we'd love one.
Try Amanda's in Springwater.
So one of the ways that there's North Creek Nurseries in Pennsylvania, Landenberg, Pennsylvania. North Creek produces lots of herbaceous plants. So an email to North Creek, you could ask, do you have vendors that you supply plants to in our region?
Yeah.
So if you're familiar with some of the bigger suppliers, or you go to an area and you find that pot with the actual nursery's name on the pot that produced it, make a connection back to the large nursery and say, do you have vendors in our area that carry your plants. So North Creek's one of those very well-known herbaceous plant companies.
I just sent a question on the chat.
Yeah.
Because plants like to grow in communities, do you recommend planting several trees closer together than just doing a single tree in a landscape?
So my answer would be look to nature.
Okay.
So you're right on the right track. The problem with planting more trees close together is, for most people, it's money. It's like, I can't afford to do this. But one of the ways to manage your landscape is I plant, let's say I want a mass of bayberry. Well, bayberry doesn't grow single, it grows in clumps. When you get around to maintaining the bayberry, let's say it grows for 5 years, I'm happy with the way it looks. But if I look at another 5 years out, it's going to be too close.
Mm.
Two ways to look at pruning that. One is to prune.
Oh dear, we lost him again.
Yeah.
Oh, hopefully he'll come back. There he is. Chris, we missed the entire thing. Chris, we missed the entire thing. You said 5 years out.
You didn't hear me say about bayberry?
We heard you about the bayberry, and you said 5 years out. I love the way it looks, but 5 years beyond that, then what happens?
So there's two ways to maintain. I either prune every single one, or I take every other one out. For a homeowner, they're going like, I spent all this money on this plant, I can't take every other one out. In reality, what happens in nature? Nature reduces it down over time. So if you're looking at it, you can go, well, the best thing for me to do, I don't want to take it out, so I'll cut it down. And what I like to refer to that is, I play, I'm going to help nature. When I prune a tree, I don't prune the entire branch off, I prune it back so the rest of the plant will grow over it. So you are right. I believe in planting more than one plant together because they grow as a community. And the roots will link together and they'll grow as a community. But planting all of one plant doesn't make sense.
Chris, we have a question from Deborah. What do you recommend to replace dying ash trees?
Yeah.
Personally, a chainsaw.
Yeah. We're going to lose a lot of ashes probably in the next 5 to 10 years. The plant that's being recommended to replace ash, you never replace a plant. Like, you just can't. Like when dogwoods got hit with dogwood blight, there's not another dogwood to put there because they just don't match. So for ash trees, one of the plants that they're recommending is linden or basswoods, because they kind of grow in the same community. Ashes will grow ubiquitous, whether it's a oak forest, whether it's a maple forest. Ash trees are just middle of the road, pioneer to middle succession forest plant. So lindens are probably going to be the recommended plant. But the problem with linden is they're a little like ash in that there's no pizzazz. There's no great fall color. There's no, like, they're too uniform, but there's just not an option. You can't replace an ash with another ash. So linden is going to be the recommended one. The problem with recommending linden now is everybody's going to plant linden. And now you have problems with linden because everybody starts to monoculture it. We don't have a whole lot of choices. We have honey locust, which is already overused, but honey locust will work. The lindens will work. Red maple will grow just about anywhere, but red maple is going to get overused because we've got sugar maples that are declining and red maple's becoming the most common plant in the Northeast. What happens with nature is we go through cycles. we'll have loss of ash trees, and then we'll have a few remainers that maybe 30 years from now, we start to have ash come back. Dogwood trees, we lost a bunch of dogwoods due to what was called discula blight. Dogwoods are starting to come back. So diversity, just don't pick one thing. But on my property, I only have one plant to replace. What should I use? So my answer right now is probably a linden, because they're not being attacked as some of the other things are.
What about the sweet gum or the black gum?
Black gum is a good choice. If a lot of people don't know of black gum. Black gum's a great plant, but it has a tap root and it's difficult to get started. If you get it started, it'll be there forever. It's got awesome fall color, but black gum's tough to find because it's tough for nurseries to successfully transplant. Elm trees, we have a lot of good elm trees right now. If you find ones that are resistant, not a lot of them, but there's a series of elms that are resistant. And I'm an elm fan. I just think we should plant more elms. I see in the chat, somebody mentioned Saratoga State Tree Nursery.
Yep.
So Saratoga Nursery, you'll be able to get small natives from. Yep. Is there a rule of thumb regarding lifespan of landscape plants around your house? If you get 15 years out of your landscape around your house, you're doing well. Generally, what happens with landscapes is you'll put in a landscape. It will look, you're going to weed for the first 3, 4 to 5 years because you're probably going to have mulch and it's just not going to get covered in enough to keep the weeds out. And then you'll, from about 3 years to about 7 years, you get glorious. Here's my glorious landscape, 3 to 7 years. And then after 7 years, things start to evolve and we start to lose things. The example would be the lilac. I plant lilac and my lilac starts to not perform well over time. It doesn't flower anymore. Well, your shade trees are now shading it out. It's not getting as much sun. And the water's getting sucked up by more plant material around it and it needs water. So 3 to 7 years is the sweet spot. And then you need to think about, is it going to evolve or should I change it? And once you've hit 15 years, if you're happy with it, just let it evolve. But most people, internally, you'd like to see your landscape change. One of the problems with planting dwarfs and small plants is you don't see change, and people want to see change. I don't want to go outside every day and see this one little tiny dwarf conifer that never moves, except if I'm a dwarf conifer enthusiast. Yeah. Anything else? All right, well, I think I'll sign off then. Nice having you listen today. And if you have questions, I think Wilma's got my email on the page, or just contact Wilma. Okay? Good to see you all.
Chris. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.